Just a quick disclaimer, this may be a longer video, so make sure you guys grab your snack, popcorn, protein shake, early, late dinner, whatever time zone you're in, and let's get right into the video. So I just took a trip, very, very random, spontaneous trip. My friend needed to go on an emergency trip, and it was gonna run into, since it was later in the day, it was gonna run into the late nights, and later in the evening she had a bit trouble seeing. So I said, yeah, I'll go so I can drive some of the trip. And we just up and went, right? It was about a 8-hour trip or so in total. So up and went, right? I have T-Mobile, she has AT&T, or her family has AT&T. It was 3 of us in the car, and we just went, right? We just left El Paso heading to Wichita Falls, Texas. I've never been, so I'm familiar with I-10 and crossing over into I-20, right? So backtracking a bit, 2015, 2016, T-Mobile on that stretch was unusable. Outside of the city limits, it was AT&T HSPA, for those of you who remember that roaming agreement, and it had really no speed, right? It was kilobytes. It was just a bad experience. Then even after that, when T-Mobile got band 12, right, they started to build out some, right? So then you had some coverage starting into Sierra Blanca. But then when you got to that corridor, whatever it's called, where it crosses, where it tells you I-10 east, and then you I-20, you go into Dallas. If you go I-10, you go San Antonio. They didn't have band 12 in those counties. So they didn't get coverage, like low band coverage into that area until they got 600 megahertz. So that area always struggled, like going up to Midland. So they had to build it very, very dense. Even before they got the mid-band, right, the N41, they had to build it very dense to get coverage out there. And even then, before that, T-Mobile would really struggle compared to the competition. But let me tell you, that has changed. I was impressed. I was very impressed going down to 10, going into the 20, very impressed, right? I didn't pick the route. We just followed the GPS, and the 20 was covered with mid-band. And comparing that to AT&T had some sites with mid-band, but not nearly as much as what T-Mobile had out there at scale, right? Which is not gonna be a surprise to any of you, because T-Mobile had the head start, right? So they're able to touch, most, if not all, of their sites along that interstate, right? So here's where it gets interesting. Crossing over, I think a little bit outside of Snyder, Texas, right? Crossing over into some of the smaller rural highways. And I've even reached out to the contact, and he said, wow, that's very rural. Like, there's nobody out there, right? Just to kind of get a feel of how many sites are out there. What can I expect, right? So T-Mobile had coverage. I was actually anticipating to finally get to use some of the Starlink. I'm crossing from I-20, right, into the back roads. I'm talking Highway 277, just small towns, very small towns, where the downtown, you miss it if you blink once. I'm talking really small. So I couldn't even use Starlink. They had coverage, 5G, everywhere. Even AT&T lost coverage on some of the stretch of like Highway 277 into Highway 83, right? Then there was, I think, Highway 287. Even AT&T lost coverage, I think, in total about 10 miles. And my friend noticed that, and she's an average consumer. So she asked me if I still had coverage, and I said yes. And then she's like, oh, I might have to move back to T-Mobile. That was her response, right? So, and you can see on screen, I'm getting mid-band speeds of almost 800 megabits in the middle of nowhere. Questionable. That's even questionable for me, right? N25, N71 could handle this, no problem. I took pictures on this next one. It covered nothing. Like, there was nothing. It was just flat land. and farmers out there. There was nothing there in terms of coverage, like pops, right? What is it covering? So AT&T and Verizon, I saw their sites, they had nothing in terms of mid-band, right? They had coverage, but there was no C-band on the sites. Verizon did very well, I would say, along I-20. I saw a lot of C-band, I-10, I-20. So Verizon did a lot of work. They're definitely ahead of AT&T on that stretch for sure. 100% for sure. So that was the first part of the trip, right? Then we get to Wichita. Wichita it's not like big in terms of a top PEA, right? I think it's about 110,000 population. But I hear T-Mobile is very strong there, right? There was apparently a lot of Sprint share, so a lot of keep sites, and then of course density, and it's 190 megahertz. So a lot of capacity, right? I'm getting a gig just about anywhere that I did the speed test. The Airbnb inside, you guys saw the videos. I did a gig. I'm going to eat. I'm doing a gig, right? It's not like everywhere, but it's like 400, 500, 600 megabits. The lowest I think I saw was like 300 megabits. So there's still a lot of growth for T-Mobile to gain in that market. And that market, it connects to, it's right at the border of Texas and Oklahoma. Oklahoma's border is like right there. It's like a 10-minute drive. You're crossing into Oklahoma, right? So we actually went to Oklahoma for a little bit, and that was rural again. So what you're seeing on screen now, the blue dot is where we were located at that time. So we're already in Oklahoma. So we're going from Granfield up to Chattanooga, right on highway, I think 36. So we're crossing into very rural territory, going up to the area of Lawton, Oklahoma, right? And then there's a lake called Medicine Park, for those of you who are familiar, and that was all rural hill territory, right? AT&T loses service again on that stretch, maybe like not as much as the first part, but like maybe 5 miles, right, in total. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get to test Starlink here. I'm in a moving vehicle. I'm gonna lose service at some point, right? I lost no service on T-Mobile again. So I have nothing to compare this trip to because I've never been there. So I don't know how T-Mobile performed prior. But I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the Sprint keep sites that they've been able to convert, but they had coverage everywhere. Now, what I will say, in some cases, AT&T, where they did have coverage, they had stronger RSRP compared to T-Mobile. So T-Mobile was stretching sites, right? But even when AT&T had 3-4 bars, T-Mobile had 1, maybe 2. T-Mobile was still doing 40, 50 megabits per second, so still usable, right? Now, uplink, it did suffer. I'll be very honest. Some of the times below 1 megabit, other times 2 megabits per second. So I'll call that out, right? Just being objective. The uplink was not great. But T-Mobile's competing. I mean, I did in total, I think 800 miles one way, right? Including the Oklahoma trip. And I did not lose service one time on T-Mobile. Not once. So I thought that was impressive. From a carrier 10 years ago that was doing who knows what, HSPA, you never knew what you were going to get leaving city limits. You just didn't know. Now, I was expecting to try Starlink. Even getting to Medicine Park, which is a smaller town, no Starlink. Even by the lake, T-Mobile had 5G mid-band. So that's just, and I know I could have looked at T-Mobile's map and saw maybe here, maybe there, but I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to be surprised. I wanted to do this trip, follow the GPS, and just randomly go to rural areas to see how T-Mobile performs. And they were good. They were very good, right? Now looking at it objectively, everybody's perspective and experience, of course, is different, right? You might still be in an area where okay, if I travel this route, T-Mobile just doesn't work, right? And it could be, like I said, it could be 1 bar and nothing loads, or it could be no service, right? But man, T-Mobile has, I mean, they had to have made huge strides just in the last 5 years. I mean, I just don't, I'm looking at the territory I traveled in besides the bigger interstate. And then especially going into this Oklahoma territory. I just don't see, even like maybe 6-7 years ago when T-Mobile was still a smaller player, I just don't see how T-Mobile covered this adequately like they do now. I just don't see that. I see this as struggling coverage 10 years ago. Like very, very rough, very slow, no service. That's what I see. Now it's like 5G everywhere. And I'm talking about not just necessarily driving from one highway to the other. I'm talking about going halfway down the highway, then turning into like an FM 57, which is another small area, and T-Mobile maintained coverage, which really, really, really surprised me. It really, really surprised me. I mean, I was messaging people, letting them know, like, hey, dude, I just drove 800 miles and T-Mobile lost no coverage when AT&T did. So that was, to me, that was very, if I'm being honest, that was very, very surprising to me. And I wanted to share that with you guys, right? So, and of course, you can share all your experiences in the comments. I want to hear from you guys. But T-Mobile has came a long way. And I know we talked about that before, but now that I've been on this trip and crossing into Oklahoma, which some have told me, you know, T-Mobile stinks in Oklahoma, and they may as well still be bad in other parts. Like there might be some rural areas by Tulsa and more north, and that's very possible, and that's where the objectivity comes in, right? I have to be objective. Like just because I experienced this on this trip, I'm not going to say T-Mobile is the best everywhere, right? I'm not going to say that. But like I said, I was really expecting to have to use Starlink. So I could tell you guys, okay, I was in a moving vehicle, I connected, and I was able to send text messages. I didn't even connect to Starlink, not one time, right? So it's a very interesting discovery for me, an eye-opener, to say the least. But I still know that some of you don't have the same experience, so I understand that, and I'm looking forward to those comments. But this was a big eye-opener, and still, right, lots of LTE out there for AT&T. I want to point that out. There's lots of 5GE and LTE definitely crossing into that rural territory, crossing into Oklahoma. AT&T did have coverage, working coverage, right, where it did work, but it was a good amount of LTE, 5GE, and then no mid-band when it was 5G. So just wanted to point that out to you guys. Like I said, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Again, I'm looking at it objectively, right? There's still a lot of work for T-Mobile to do, like in the Dakotas, Montanas, like in those rural areas. But like I said, I traveled 800 miles total, expecting to use Starlink in some of the rural territories and highways, and that did not happen. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, subscribe. See you in the next one. Peace.